Good evening. Welcome to the Pullman City Council meeting. Tonight is a workshop session in which we're going to discuss legislative priorities. But before we do, Mike, would you like to take a roll, or do you want me to do it? I can do
Nope,
it.
I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Mayor Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Sorensen.
Here.
Councilmember Parks.
Here.
Councilmember Chapman. Councilmember Records.
Here.
Councilmember Macoll.
Here.
Councilmember Weller. Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Both Nathan Weller and Brandon Chapman notified us they could not be here tonight. Do I hear a motion to excuse?
So move. Second.
Move and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, tonight is the night we're going to take a look at a number of different things, but we're looking at our legislative priorities. Mike has been very kind to send us what we have done in the past, and I think every one of us comes in with some ideas. And we've also seen a lot of emails, including some that came out late this afternoon. Mike, do you want to just set the stage, and then we'll just start discussing?
Sure, thank you. And yeah, some of this comes from some trauma of my own from last year, stepping in as interim and getting everything going at the last minute, and then realizing we had a legislative session that we had to plan for. So I wanted to make sure we got started plenty early this year, give everybody some time to look at some things. So yeah, I did include the previous 2 years worth of legislative priorities. This afternoon, I included an email and as well as hard copies to you this evening, just from staff through our different items that have come across our plates that we're seeing professionally, everything from police with some of the fallout of the legislation in July and how we can connect some dots that there are some items that need some more explanation from the Attorney General's office and how to get that done to the WRPA through Recreation Department, and saw there was a couple things from Public Works, and then I just added the 2 items that I just saw that weren't covered that have been kind of on my plate for a little bit, and that's with the railroad properties as well as the downtown revitalization project, getting the support from our delegation on that, because it's a very involved project, as you know, and it does come across the DOT and some other groups, so helping smooth the way could make sure that we don't bottleneck. So really, the whole intent was through this to give council an opportunity to discuss their items and how you would like to go forward. I can tell you we've reached out to our delegation, and we have 2 of the 3 fully confirmed. The third is bound to confirm, and there's just been some communications back and forth, but it looks like the 14th they will be in Pullman ready to meet with us and discuss our legislative priorities. So if the schedule pleases the council, I'm going to continue on that, but if there's some variations that we would like to make, love to hear about that. But this is your time. I'll be taking notes, and we'll be recording too, so we can come up with a document that we can make Pullman successful.
Okay, different ways we can start this, but I think we're all in agreement that funding the downtown revitalization project it's been your number 1 goal. It's the number 1 goal that's on all of our lists for economic development. So I think we can all be agreed that that is one of our major legislative goals, if that's okay with everybody. I mean, just basically going off of what we discussed. So that's one of them. And we're going to try and keep them down as opposed to the 3 pages or more that we had last time. So if you can start talking and giving suggestions. I think most of us have come with a list, but we'll pass it around, and if you have some others on the list. As for economic development, if we can have a sub-part to that, downtown is number 1. A sub-part is economic development for this whole community and the whole region is the Pullman-Moscow Regional Terminal. That also is economic development as well. But I mean, those are the kinds of things that I had on a list here that could work too. So, yeah. Pat?
Is there a way to include under the downtown revitalization project something that also emphasizes the need for the south bypass, which will also add to the whole revitalization aspect. I know that's been out there in a number of different ways, but if we can tie it to this.
Or we go by subheadings of economic development, transportation, safety, those kind of things, we could also do it that way too. That's another way to do it. Al?
Yeah, I'm not ready to commit to the south bypass. So
Okay.
I don't think we can say that.
it's a
I would
long
like
ways
to do like what Glenn was saying. You know, we can talk about it as, but we haven't decided south, north, and there's some good discussion and items in here for tonight. So I don't want to commit to the south bypass, but I think it's great to talk about moving the
Maybe we call
A
it A
bypass.
bypass.
Yes.
Or
You see what
the
you
option
see what I'm
for
saying?
A
So,
bypass.
I mean, I know we're going to talk about bypasses here, so that's all
I mean, I'm not
But-
tied to a south bypass.
Yeah.
We've just been talking about the south bypass
Yeah.
for several years, so that's why that comes up. But I think a bypass to get that traffic out of downtown.
I think that's a great thing about using it, so however.
I'm going to go to Ann next, and then we'll just keep rolling. And it's a workshop, so we're wide
Okay.
open here. So-
Well, and I also like Sean's memo, Sean Coates, about if we're talking about bypass, let's ask, we need to, and other people said it too, we need to make specific asks. So his example was, let's ask for the funding for design of a bypass, so that, because he indicated that if we do that and we have a design, then that makes it easier for his department to continue to apply for grant funding because we have solid design. So as we're thinking about all of these, I like the idea of, we can come up with the ideas, but then I think we need to think about, is there a specific ask that we can actually say? We want funding for a terminal building, or infrastructure for the terminal, or design for the bypass, or whatever, and not just say, these are our goals. But if we can somehow make it more specific, and it may not always be possible, but I think that would really be more effective and resonate more with the legislators as well.
Yeah,
Eileen?
I kind of like that idea of if we want to do economic development or like support for downtown revitalization, obviously is number one. And then have a transportation piece in there. And we can put all the greatest hits in there. We can put bypass, reduction of traffic, and
The rail tracks will fit in that too.
that, it would,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? You know, but
Yeah.
I was thinking also of, what do they call it? Non-motorized transport in there, because I know there's grant money floating around out there for that specifically. So.
Safe paths to schools is, because I've had a couple of suggestions, you probably heard the same thing, from people that found another way to get safely from one area of Pullman to Lincoln Middle School that's not this paved path, but they have another way of getting through, and that could also be.
But yeah, to tie that to like specific grant allocations, whatever the terminology is. But yeah, so, yeah, non-motorized transport.
I had another thing on my transportation list, but also ties to safety, and it still hasn't been done, and this was part of our legislative package a year or two ago. And I know Senator Schessler got very upset with it, and so did I. That is passing lanes on Highway 26 to get people here safely. And we had 2 passing lanes, and both of them got, postponed. But I think that needs to be up there high on the list for our legislators to work on. When I had a meeting with a West Side legislator, and we were listening to her comments about student housing and other things, when we finally finished that conversation, I said, now, I hope you will help us on Highway 26 to get us some passing lanes. Because, again, trying to bring people safely to Pullman, especially the WSU students, their parents, and fans and all that.
Well, that's that economic development
It is.
aspect of it as
It is.
well.
I mean, it hits all of those.
Because,
And I
what-
know
yeah.
we've tried to be Pullman-centric, but it's getting to Pullman.
It's getting to
And
Pullman.
it also helps that.
Yeah.
But I think it still needs to be up there on that list.
Well, and it also helps, it makes our residents safer for all of our Pullman residents, students who are attending Washington State, or
yeah.
University of Washington.
Who are we? Yeah.
Western, Central. So we have a lot of people who travel that direction
Right.
as well. It isn't just about coming to Pullman, it's also people students who attend universities on the west side.
Yeah, we want to sort of eliminate the phrase, you can't get there from here, yeah.
Okay. So I saw a heading there of economic development, but we can figure that one out a little bit later. Let's have some other ideas that you have. Nathan did send me, and this was on my list too, and that is something that we've talked about here. We've had mental health professionals talk about it, and that is the difficulty of trying to find enough mental health professionals to help our community. And one of the suggestions that came back was, the state could loosen up or at least accept certification from other states. And that would take care of a lot of the issues. People who are highly trained in Idaho, they ought to be accepted in the state of Washington. And that would help a lot in terms of mental health professionals that could be available. So that was also on my list. That was on Nathan's list as well. So,
That's also an issue for nursing and
Yes.
other health professionals as well.
So I know one professional who, when COVID hit, went completely, Zoom meetings, not in-person stuff. And she's actually now closed her office for no in-person things. It's all teleconferencing. That's what I was trying to say.
Telehealth kind of thing.
And, which could be a good way to pick up some of this mental health stuff. If you don't have to be in the same room and you can do it that way, we could get people from anywhere to help. I mean, it's sad that she's not going to have the physical office open, but I mean, that got me thinking about all of this, that, they don't physically have to be here anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, some probably, yes,
But for billing purposes, they have to be certified in the state.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying?
Insurance, yeah.
Understand.
Yeah.
Okay, other suggestions for our list?
Yes, and the mental health brings me to activating outdoor spaces. We know that outdoor recreation is going to be extremely important for recovery, both economic recovery and social recovery and mental health recovery. And so that brings us to our, hopefully, our redevelopment of our playfields area and the use of that space that's currently has railroad tracks on it that are no longer needed. So that might be a way to open up that topic, is to activating outdoor spaces, and that goes in with recreation and all the, that's tourism too, and all the dollars that brings in as well. But activating those great spaces that we've got, because that could fit under just about any category that.
It certainly, and that's I think the strong point about it, when you can hit a number of different categories.
Yeah,
like we
that's
talked
sort of the idea, because, yeah, that's a great space, but it's,
In Mike's email to us today, and the second bullet point about abandoning the railways, I think that should be a major, that could help us in so many ways with so many different things, and we just have to get them to understand that it needs to be abandonment, not banking. Is that what I'm?
Right, it's not enough to be out of service, because then
Or out
it
of
could be put
service.
back into service, and certainly discussing banking of trails for it. That's what's happened along the Chipman Trail, and I'm sure that would come along with anything, but yeah, as long as those tracks exist and could be reactivated, you're talking about 50-foot easements on either side where you can't do anything, and that kills a lot of production work. If you think from the south end of town to the north end, whether it's the play fields and activating that, and some projects we talked about offline there through the downtown area, even up to the north for a potential mountain bike park, and even some flood control issues on that north end as well, that getting those railroad tracks to be more than just out of service can really open up a lot of community and economic development. And it's really a no low-cost thing for the delegation because just,
It's basically just a paperwork shuffle.
right, exactly. That's a win.
And there may be some brownfields concerns there, but that's, yeah.
And there's funding for brownfield.
And that's right, there's funding for
Palouse has
brownfields.
found that several times. I know.
Puts
Dan,
the
you have
trestle
a-
back in play
Yeah,
and those things.
I think going along with the railroad discussion, there has been some interest on the north end of town from some of the companies in the industrial park there about, and lots of employees there and residents up in the Dabco area of apartment land up there about creating more parks, recreation spaces up there. Specifically, I've talked with several people about the ideas about a mountain bike park, those types of things. And having the railways kind of take up all of that potential development opportunity along the river, like really limits what we can do to kind of create a gem out of our rivers. Because that's something we've talked about a lot in the past with the downtown master plan is how do we highlight the rivers as a central element of Pullman's identity. And I think the railroads having to have those limitations on development around them really limits our opportunities to really kind of capture the rivers as an asset.
Yes, and north of town, I mean, that's beautiful, north of town. And one of the advantages, they found this out with the Hanford Reach too, one of the advantages of having land that's been out of service of any type and not been used for any kind of use is that it tries to retain its natural state. The native vegetation has had a chance to regrow. You can walk out there on any afternoon and see deer, without a doubt. And so that's really a beautiful, untouched space, and it's been basically unoccupied for, 40 years? Near some of it. Yeah, because that line hasn't been in use.
So, yeah, the
Yeah.
story at our house goes that we were looking through some old pictures, and my wife played state softball here in 1992, and there's some railroad tracks back there. So, yeah, I'm starting to feel my age a little bit, but it wasn't that much longer afterwards that things closed down. So it's north of 25 years, certainly.
Yeah, and like saying that space north of town, they had the railroad cars stored out there, for goodness knows
Oh,
how.
my goodness, yes.
So that's a big chunk of time, yeah.
Is this something that the legislators can help us with the railroads to get them to
They
abandon
can put
it? I
some
mean, is it?
pressure on the Department of Transportation, which controls it.
And in past, though, our legislators have not been very willing to abandon railroad lines. Is that kind of where we've?
Yeah, Schussler's point was he always wanted to make sure that if rail ever came back or they needed it, they could do it. And the other thing is he's always concerned about fiber runs. Because state has a right of way. He was hoping they could use it for fiber runs too. if they
Still
needed
could.
it, so.
Still
Yeah,
could.
well, I think it's a really good ask for them
Yeah.
when they come to talk about this
Yeah, especially if we've got a plan,
for a lot of things.
rather
yeah.
than just, if we've got a plan, yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk about, and next week, the folks from WSU will be here to present their gateway project that was kind of discussed. So there's some rail property kind of in there. And then some years ago, they also did some of this imagining down by the play fields. And we still have possession of some of those imagining projects. And as we talk about a full downtown revitalization and everything else, I think there's some things that we can actually put tangible in front of our delegation and say, see, we have big plans.
Yeah.
They may not be exactly what we do at the end, but that'll certainly get the ball rolling, as Councilmember Sorensen mentioned, and as you're,
Okay, other things we could have on our list.
One of the things that I hear very frequently, especially from young professionals moving to Pullman and from college students wanting to think about remaining in Pullman after they graduate, is housing affordability. And there's been a lot of things on the that have come out of the legislature in the last couple of years, but that still remains a very high-touch issue for Pullman in the ability to not just cost of purchasing homes, but like rental rates going up consistently as well, and housing affordability. As we talk about economic development as well, it becomes harder and harder for people you know, the minimum wage is continuing to rise as part of the legislature's stepped increases, but this is also going to be an issue for us in our small businesses' ability to hire people at kind of minimum wage or those level of jobs if they can't afford to stay here. So I know employment for a lot of our small businesses right now is very much in flux. A lot of our restaurants are finding it hard to keep staffing. And if they continuously have to pull from student population because they're here for the university, and if our student population can't afford to live here after they graduate, it's just the perpetual having to hire every couple of years and not having any kind of long-term employment for those types of positions. So I think that's something that we need to seriously consider, what options and what would we have as an ask from the legislature that goes along with that, because there's lots of ideas that are thrown around, but that's a complicated issue, and it's an issue that exists everywhere. But I think, you know, that needs to be, you know, something that we're considering as we go forward as well.
So what would that look like, Dan? You know, if we wanted to put something on a half a sheet of paper and say, here, do this about affordable housing for this area specifically.
Specifically, we need to have some more financial incentives for developers. You know, there's been a couple of bills that have talked about opening some of those things up in the last couple of years, but it's how do we entice developers to go for building in a way that is going to be more affordable? And like we've definitely got some a developer here that has done some projects recently in that realm, but in terms of actually building things that people can afford, there's not a lot of financial incentive for developers right now.
Correct. And there's also a problem just trying to find, tradespeople to
Yeah.
do those homes. And that's been a big issue, not only here, but elsewhere. Other items on your list? Again, we're trying to keep it limited, and I think we've done a pretty good job so far in terms of saying, okay, here's the main thrust is downtown redevelopment. Find a way that we can help fund downtown and our modification of downtown, get that one going. Brandon also had on a list that he sent, which is something that Eileen has talked about, others have talked about in the past. What happens when you have a landlord that doesn't want to do anything about their building? In other states, there are some ways of either incentivizing or making sure they get something done. We have a limitation in the state of Washington. Is there anything that would help our downtown if we could ask the legislators for some way of dealing with downtown buildings that appear that they're not even asking for different clients to occupy the spaces? Some of them claim they're doing it, but is there any way to incentivize or at least do something with those empty buildings downtown?
Well, we really need to drill down in a meaningful way, and this is our homework maybe, and find out what really can be done. Now, I know Laura's kind of shied away from it, and I don't blame her because it is complicated and it's just really difficult to sort out what is allowed here in the state of Washington. But really drill down into that and see what's being done in other communities, so again, we can have something to, because the changes perhaps do need to come at the state legislature level, and there's maybe very little we can do at a local level here in Washington, I don't know. But if we could all do our homework maybe on that. Now, I know Bellingham, because I talked to their chief, and this has been several years ago, he's a Coug. He knows our situation, and they have sort of an outreach team that deals directly with property owners or the responsible party or the managers, and they actually meet. Of course, this was pre-COVID. And they actually meet and discuss, okay, what are you going to do? And they sit down like reasonable people or try to be reasonable with one another and work out a specific plan and a timeline. If we had some capacity to do that, I realize capacity and manpower, person power is always hard to come by, but to have some direct function of, but again, the state legislature, depending upon what our laws are, I don't know, Dan, what do we know, what do we don't know? in terms of what kind of pressure we can put on private property owners?
We're extremely limited, as Laura said before, on, some of the things that we know we can do enforcement action on, is where there's drug activity, where there's the premises is not secured, and where there's health and safety concerns. So that may include vermin, pests, that may include doors and windows that are not secured, or dangerous conditions that are present that represent health and safety threats to humans in general. And beyond that, we get into issues of, taking somebody's property from them without just compensation. That becomes a constitutional issue. And so it's not just necessarily a Washington State Legislature issue, it becomes a constitutional question. And other states may have a little bit more tolerance than Washington does, but it's not necessarily something that just the legislature can fix, I think, because it's also how the courts in Washington are going to interpret those things. What I think we may be able to conceptualize, and this is probably a bigger issue than just us, but like the Association of Washington Cities or other cities asking for this as well, is some sort of incentive program from the state through a grant program or some other incentive program for businesses that are absent or vacant in having, for more than 2 years or whatever it is, to give them incentives to try to help spruce up the front of their building, to help encourage somebody to rent it or purchase it. And I've thought about this in terms of coupling those types of programs with funds for improving accessibility of entrances to private businesses as well, because that's one thing that we hear about our downtown area a lot is people with disabilities have a hard time getting into businesses or accessing restrooms in businesses downtown. And the building owners and the business owners, their frustrations with that is some of those improvements cost a lot of money, and having some sort of matching program or things that are dedicated towards accessibility could potentially open up funds for storefront improvements, access improvements, storefronts. And so I think that's something that could be an ask of the legislature to explore, those potential options for incentivizing, improving those things, and the accessibility and the kind of dilapidated building storefronts, I think, kind of go together. Because if you're improving the accessibility, you're going to be putting new elements in, and that can be kind of a win-win for everybody.
I know that Jen has given me, and we've worked together on this. We've drafted a couple of letters. We sent out now, we've had two going to two owners of buildings downtown that haven't done anything with their place. One was in Salt Lake, one we've done in Spokane. So we're starting to reach out that way, and haven't heard back yet on the one from Salt Lake, because that one's been out for about a week and a half. The other one's out more frequent with that, so, all right.
Well, and I'm wondering too, we don't know what we don't know, and we can try to get as much information as we can, but maybe we just ask them and say, here's what we'd like to do, here's what we know, what don't we know, and what do you know that could possibly, I would ask them. They might, one or more of them may have experience in this with some other municipality in the state, and they may say, oh, well, I think it's worth asking, because it is a huge issue that citizens are so frustrated with this issue, and they keep coming back to us and saying, this is unacceptable, please do something. And then we say, well, here's what we can do, but that's all we can do. And it is frustrating, and it just keeps going round and round. And so maybe we just ask them first if they know something, or maybe they will go back and research it as well. I don't know.
You've had a chance to look at the 2021 priorities, and I know that was an exhaustive list. Is there anything like one item or two items that need to go in our 2022 list off of that? We've incorporated some of that already, but is there anything there that?
I have a question. And now I'm not going to be able to say what it is, but the Public Works,
Trust.
the Public Works Trust Fund is there, but the 2022 priorities for AWC mention a public works assistance support or assistance account?
It's basically the same thing.
Is that the same
Yeah,
thing? So it's been renamed. My thought in some of that is if we were able to align our priorities with, and I only noticed 3 for AWC, if we were able to align our priorities with their priorities, and it looks like that could possibly mesh together, that might get a little better attention, better priority if there's a thought that we are uniform with what our lobbying organization is looking at, then that might give us a little bit more leverage, if you will. And it doesn't happen very often that we align so
Yeah.
well with AWC.
Yeah.
Just a thought,
They fight our battles, but, yeah.
but kind of half-heartedly.
Yeah, but this is really specific for us, and that would definitely help us in terms of loans. I mean, before, we were able to help with our wastewater treatment plant at a 0.5% interest, and we couldn't, that's the nice thing about that trust fund, that was great, but that went away.
Because the legislative priorities right now are, 1, to ensure basic infrastructure funding. Second is to protect Transportation Benefit District Funding Authority, and the third would be to pass a transportation package, which some of what we're talking about falls in line with this. So it's just a thought of the best way to frame what we're
But
doing.
we
to
could have our
push it.
specifics, and then, which could come about by funding the transportation.
Especially, yeah,
package.
transportation
Yeah.
especially,
So you
yeah.
have ours and then something underneath that.
Yeah, that
could
just
work.
kind of pulls it all together. Just a thought.
Other comments?
Do we know what do we have a feeling for what the legislature is going to take up in terms of Chief Gary's comments? Is that
We know it's definitely coming up before them, but we don't know exactly.
what
I mean, they,
the mood is?
yeah, because, I mean, some of these things were brought to the legislature's attention that Gary had earlier.
Yeah.
Now, they have found out some issues with the caliber in terms of what Spokane's had to buy and what we've had to buy here, so we could have less lethal. There were some unintentional,
Right.
consequences, as you well know, so. Almost like the long-term health care plan that has some issues. You know, we don't have to sit here all night and try to figure out more things to add either, so I just want to make sure you're aware of that.
Right.
Because this is a workshop session. Let's just stop for a second and say, have we covered the number one item that we needed? And that's the downtown. We've got that one covered. We've got some additions to that in terms of the abandonment of rail lines, funding economic development. We've talked about safety items, not only here, but on Highway 26. We've talked about bypass, not north or south, but bypass to relieve the downtown. Outdoor recreation, playfields, which can tie to the abandonment of rail lines. We've talked about mental health in terms of certification from other states. Mentioned the airport terminal. Anything that is on your list that we haven't recited there?
Well, let's just talk about the bypass thing for a minute.
Okay.
Now, and you're right, Sean's given us some good stuff there, and,
Yeah.
his suggestion here actually is to do the $4 million design thing for the north bypass. And I think that's a great idea, and I think part of our problem is we just give them words and we never ask for anything
Exactly.
numbers wise. And,
Or just
we
a
got,
focus. Okay, well, we want,
So
you
we
know,
want
Yeah.
design, we want money for
so
design.
I know that Steve Mader and his development as he moves north is leaving the area that's in his, not
Holdings.
possession, but what he's
Land.
farming right now and everything, you know, so that you can kind of see where it goes. And
And he's consulted with us all the time on this north bypass.
100%.
Because the county and the city, and that's something that still was pending back with Kevin's day, where the state was going to give us that, because that came out of the airport deal.
yeah.
So,
So I mean, again, I'm not south bypass or north bypass,
just bypass.
but something to reroute some traffic.
Yeah.
And, you know, what was it, 2005, there was something done on the south, of 2007, something done on the north. And, you know, I say we see if we can't maybe push this to them about doing this design work for the north bypass.
Because when we've looked at it with Steve Mader and others, as we have to do the airport, we've talked about a 3-lane, possible 4-lane, that's on that north area, because that land is going to be, the right-of-way is given to the city.
Yeah,
Which
it's
we
already,
didn't have
it's already
before.
been paid for in
Yeah, it's
the
already
state's
taken care of.
hands, so, and if
So
they're
the
talking.
major acquisition has been done.
Right, they're talking about giving it to
Yeah,
us,
right.
not selling it to us,
Yeah.
but giving it to us.
As long as it's
Well-
used for transportation purposes.
Right,
Correct.
I think, yeah.
But there you go.
And I think Sean has given us the language here, direct
Yes.
appropriation.
Correct.
I think that was.
So I would, in our transportation talking, maybe throw this as a focus.
Yeah.
I'm, whatever you guys are thinking about it too. I mean, at least it starts the ball rolling a little
And
bit.
that should be on our list.
I think so,
And we could actually have that transportation head, that is a specific.
yeah.
Right.
And then we could have other things underneath that too.
Yeah.
Would work.
You know, I think that's
The
good.
more
yeah.
specific we can be in a general way, you know what I mean? But in the more direction
Covers our
we,
bases, yeah.
then at least we're not saying, oh, we want this, but, and then it just floats out there. We can say, we want this, and here's the first step that we need help with, boom, or whatever. I think that would be really, and this is very helpful from Sean, if other department heads have that sort of feedback going forward, to say, here's the ask, here are the steps, here's how we start. You know, I'm not asking for all of them to do that right now, but that just really jumped out
Well,
at
they've
me.
already been asked to do that for us. So
Yeah.
that was all due before this. thing.
Right, but I mean,
And
you
we
know.
have heard from Gary and Sean and others.
Yeah, but I mean, just going forward, that's a really good model to say, you know, here's the history, here's where it's at. If you want to move on this, here's what you ask for.
I
Sure.
think we have a workable one-page document.
Yeah,
Here.
and I'd pulled up a couple different cities here during the discussion, so I've seen all across a really good example for what I'm hearing up here is Marysville, and their asks are very specific. The Grove Street overcrossing, 24 million. And then it goes on and talks about that. 156th Street Northeast overcrossing, 1 million in design. And then it goes on a little further, and then it talks about some additional priorities that are more nebulous, for lack of a better word, where they're talking about the proposed reforms. This is last year's, of course. So it's not a specific dollar amount, but here's something
Sure.
that we're interested in. And if you jump into, you know, here's Kent, complete the 224th Street arterial, $20 million. So there's price tags attached to these things, and I think that when I was a council member, we were advocating for projects we threw price tags on, and we weren't afraid to do it, and we could talk about phasing and other things. But, yeah, I
At
mean,
least it's a starting point.
Yeah.
It's somewhere to start.
yeah.
So I'm hearing, and unless hear otherwise, I think we have our one-page document from what I've heard from tonight. We've got the major issues that we wanted to have on our legislative agenda, and that was the main purpose of this workshop. If there's nothing else, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Wait,
Point
Mr. Urban.
of procedure, unfortunately. And this is partly my fault. I got to jump back in here. According to the agenda, there is new business, so I think
Is there a new business?
there is. That was something that I had asked to have removed because it was a work session, but it slipped past the goalie after the agenda was
Oh,
posted, so if you wouldn't mind just at least,
so.
I have none,
Floor's yours for new business.
no new business.
There is no new
But I
business.
didn't know if the audience, and, yeah.
Okay. Well, I already checked. It's the Evergreen Reporter.
Okay,
And she didn't come up with new business that I knew of.
okay.
Okay. So there is no, open the floor for new business. There isn't any now. With that, thank you very much. That was 30
Mike.
seconds ago.
Overthinking it?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it's been a while.
All right. Motion to adjourn, do I hear?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moving second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
Thank you very much.
We've
Short and
we've
sharp.
accomplished what we should be doing.
Yep, short and sharp, we're good.
And that